The sea, vast, endless, and unforgiving. For centuries it has carried men and their dreams to distant horizons. But during the Second World War, those same waters became a graveyard. Beneath the rolling waves, death waited patiently, in the form of German U-boats, invisible predators that hunted American merchant ships. While the world remembers the soldiers who stormed beaches and the pilots who ruled the skies, few remember the quiet heroes who fought on these waters. They were not soldiers by training, nor warriors by profession. They were simple men, fishermen, deckhands, engineers, who turned their love for the sea into a weapon against tyranny. This is their story, the story of the Mathews men, 7 brothers and dozens of brave souls from a tiny county in Virginia who gave everything they had to keep the world alive. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Front Line of World War II. World War II was not merely a clash of armies. It was a storm that swallowed the entire world. It raged in the muddy trenches of Europe, thundered in the skies over Britain, and scorched the deserts of Africa. But there was another front, one that remained unseen and often forgotten, a front where no flags waved proudly and no generals gave heroic speeches. It was the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, cold, endless, and merciless. Here, amid waves taller than houses and nights darker than fear itself, men fought a silent war, a war not for glory, not for medals, but simply for survival. The Battle of the Atlantic was unlike any other. It wasn't fought with tanks or bombers, but with courage, endurance, and faith. Across these waters sailed the Allied merchant ships, humble vessels that carried everything needed to keep the free world alive: food for starving Britain, oil to power the engines of war, ammunition for the soldiers at the front, and medical supplies for the wounded who clung to life. They were the arteries through which the blood of freedom flowed. But beneath those same waters, hidden in the black silence, lurked a deadly predator: Hitler's U-boats. These submarines were the sharks of the Atlantic, gliding unseen, waiting patiently to strike. When the torpedoes came, there was no warning, no sirens, no mercy. One moment, the ocean was calm. The next, a fireball tore through the sky. Men who had been laughing minutes before were thrown into freezing, oil-covered water. They screamed for help that would never come, their voices lost in the wind and waves. Each ship that sank meant more than just the loss of steel. It meant the loss of sons, husbands, and fathers. And yet, despite the fear, despite the death that stalked every voyage, the men of the U.S. Merchant Marine kept sailing. They were not trained soldiers. They were ordinary Americans with extraordinary courage. They knew that every ship they guided through those haunted waters carried hope for millions. They became the lifeline of freedom, the invisible hands that kept the world from collapsing. But this lifeline came at a terrible, almost unbearable cost. The Atlantic demanded payment in blood and tears. Thousands of merchant sailors would never see home again. Their ships became their coffins, their names lost to the sea. Yet their sacrifice made victory possible. And though history may have forgotten their faces, the waves still remember. Chapter 2. Mathews County, the town that breathed the sea. Along the calm waters of the Chesapeake Bay, where sunlight dances over green marshes and the air carries the faint scent of salt and pine, lies a small corner of America called Mathews County, Virginia. It was not a place of riches or power, no grand cities, no factories, no roaring crowds. Just a quiet town of weathered docks, narrow dirt roads, and simple homes that faced the sea. For generations, the people of Mathews had lived by the rhythm of the tides. The ocean was their teacher, their provider, and their greatest test. Fathers taught their sons to steer boats before they could ride bicycles, and mothers learned to read the sky, to tell from the color of the clouds whether their men would return home that night or not. The people of Mathews were born with salt in their veins and wind in their souls. Every family had someone who went to sea, a father who fished, a brother who worked on a freighter, an uncle who captained a vessel through storms. The ocean was not a choice for them. It was a destiny. It fed them, shaped them, and bound them to something greater than themselves. But during the dark years of the Second World War, that same ocean that once gave them life would demand something far more precious: their blood and their sons. When America was thrust into war, when radio broadcasts spoke of Pearl Harbor and the world teetered on the edge of chaos, the young men of Mathews did not hesitate. They didn't wait for the sound of marching drums or the call of the draft. They went where they were needed most, to the decks of the U.S. merchant marine ships. They knew these vessels would face torpedoes, storms, and flames, but they also knew that their skill at sea was a weapon no army could replace. So they volunteered, quietly, fearlessly, to sail across oceans haunted by death. They carried no rifles, wore no helmets, and had no promises of glory. Their war would not be fought with gunfire and trenches, but with the courage to keep a ship afloat when the horizon was burning. They manned the cargo ships that carried the world's hope across the ocean, steel hulls packed with food for the starving, oil for the engines of war, and ammunition for soldiers fighting on distant shores. Every voyage was a gamble with fate, and every home in Mathews County lived with the ache of worry, praying for the safe return of their sons. Among these brave souls was one remarkable family, the Hodges brothers, 7 sons of the same mother, bound not only by blood, but by a shared destiny written upon the sea. Their story would soon become the heart of Mathews County's legacy, a story of love, courage, heartbreak, and endurance. For through their lives and their losses, the world would come to understand what true sacrifice means. Chapter 3. The Hodges Brothers, 7 Sons of the Sea. Their names were Jesse, Raymond, Frank, Joe, Billy, Walter, and Leslie Hodges, 7 brothers born of one mother's strength and one family's faith. They grew up beneath the creaking roof of a small wooden house near the Chesapeake Bay, where the scent of salt water drifted through open windows and the cries of seagulls echoed at dawn. The home was humble, its floors worn smooth by bare feet, its walls whispering the laughter and quarrels of childhood. In the evenings, as the sun sank behind the marshes, their mother, Ollie Hodges, would hum old hymns while preparing supper, her voice mingling with the soft rhythm of waves outside. It was a simple life, but one rich with love, discipline, and an unspoken understanding. The sea would always be part of them. From the moment they could walk, the Hodges boys were drawn to the water. They'd stand at the shoreline, eyes fixed on the distant ships gliding across the horizon, their white sails glowing against the morning light. To them, those ships weren't just vessels, they were symbols of purpose, adventure, and manhood. Each brother dreamed of the day he would command his own ship, braving storms and faraway oceans. The sea called to them like a living thing, whispering promises of freedom, challenge, and destiny. So when war came, when radio voices spoke of chaos in Europe and torpedoes in the Atlantic, the Hodges brothers didn't need to be asked. They knew what they had to do. One by one, they packed their few belongings, kissed their mother's cheek, and set off for the docks. Each departure was heavier than the last. Ollie would stand on the porch in her faded apron, her hands gripping the wooden railing as she watched her sons walk down the dusty road toward the bay. The breeze would carry their laughter for a moment, and then silence. Only the cry of gulls and the echo of waves remained. She tried to smile each time, but her heart clenched with every farewell. She had spent her life reading the moods of the sea. She knew its beauty, but she also knew its cruelty. Every mother in Mathews County knew that once the ocean took hold of your sons, it might never give them back. And yet, deep down, she understood something that made her both proud and fearful. Her boys were not running away from danger. They were sailing straight into it, guided by duty, courage, and the belief that freedom was worth the risk. At night, Ollie would sit by the window, the glow of a kerosene lamp flickering across her face, listening to the wind rustle through the pines. Somewhere beyond that darkness, she knew her sons were sailing, across oceans filled with fire and fear, carrying the hopes of a world that had no idea who they were. And though her heart ached with worry, her spirit remained unbroken. She had raised them to be men of the sea and men of honor. Chapter 4. The Wolves Beneath the Waves. In the chilling winter of 1942, as snow fell quietly over the American coast, Adolf Hitler turned his gaze across the Atlantic and unleashed a new nightmare, a secret operation called Paukenschlag, or Operation Drumbeat. It was not an attack with bombers or armies, but with shadows, sleek, deadly submarines known as U-boats, silently gliding beneath the waves like steel predators. Their mission was simple: to choke America's lifeline, to sink every ship that dared to carry hope, food, and freedom across the sea. By night, these U-boats prowled the waters like wolves, their periscopes slicing through the black water, hunting their prey with cold precision. The merchant ships, slow, heavy, and unarmed, were easy targets. They had no escort, no radar, and no warning when death approached. One moment, the horizon would be peaceful. Stars shimmering above, the gentle hum of engines breaking the silence. The next, the world would erupt in fire. From New York Harbor to the Caribbean, the night skies burned red. Flames rose hundreds of feet into the air as oil tankers and freighters exploded, turning the ocean into a field of floating infernos. The smell of burning fuel mixed with the salt of the sea. The cries of drowning men echoed in the dark before being swallowed by the waves. Entire crews vanished in moments, their ships slipping beneath the surface so quickly that not even a distress signal could escape. The next morning, the tide would carry wreckage and oil-soaked bodies onto American beaches, haunting proof that the war had come home. For the first time in history, Americans could stand on their own shores and see the smoke of battle rising on the horizon. The Atlantic, once a highway of trade and travel, had become a graveyard. Yet even as death haunted every wave, the U.S. Merchant Marine kept sailing. They were not trained for war. These men had no guns, no armor, no orders to attack. They were civilians, sailors, fathers and sons, armed only with courage and duty. Each voyage they made was an act of defiance. They carried wheat for the hungry, oil for the tanks, medicine for the wounded, and ammunition for the soldiers fighting in Europe. They knew that if they failed, the entire Allied effort could collapse. But still, they went, sailing through seas that blazed with the wreckage of their friends, navigating waters where silence could mean safety or sudden death. And among those brave souls who kept returning to the ocean again and again were the men of Mathews County, Virginia. They were fishermen turned fighters, mariners turned heroes, men whose courage was born not of training, but of heritage. The sons of the bay, who had grown up reading the waves, now faced the most dangerous waters in history. And even as U-boats circled beneath them, they kept their course steady, not for fame, not for medals, but for something far greater: the survival of the free world. Chapter 5. The First Losses. Fire on the Horizon. At first, the news came like whispers carried on the wind. Small, scattered, almost unbelievable. A ship lost off the coast of Florida, they said. No survivors. Then another, missing near the frozen waters of Greenland. Gone without a trace. Each report felt distant, like thunder rumbling beyond the horizon. But soon the storm drew closer. Then, one terrible night, the ocean turned into a furnace of death. One of the Hodges brothers' ships, a freighter packed with vital cargo, was struck by a German torpedo. The silence of the night shattered with a thunderous roar as steel ripped apart like paper. The explosion tore through the hull, and within seconds, flames leapt skyward, a red burning sunrise on a sea of blackness. The water boiled with fire and oil, the air filled with screams that carried for miles across the waves. Men ran for their lives, their faces lit by the glow of burning fuel. Some leaped into the icy water, desperate to escape the inferno, clutching pieces of floating wreckage as the ship sank beneath them. The sea, cold and merciless, closed over their heads, swallowing their voices. A few managed to crawl into lifeboats, shivering and wounded, their eyes fixed on the horizon, praying that rescue would come. But the Atlantic was vast and cruel. Hours turned into days, the sun rising and setting over endless waves. The rescue ships searched and searched, scanning the waters for signs of life, but all they found was debris and silence. The ocean had already claimed its dead. When the telegram finally reached Mathews County, it was as if time itself stopped. The whole town went quiet. The docks, once filled with laughter and the creak of boats, stood still. Mothers wept quietly on their porches, clutching handkerchiefs and photographs. Fathers, too proud to cry, stared out at the gray horizon, knowing the sea that had once fed them had now taken their sons. And inside a small, weathered wooden house by the bay, Ollie Hodges sat in her rocking chair, the telegram trembling in her hands. The paper was thin, but the words were heavy, heavier than any anchor, sharper than any blade. "We regret to inform you." The ink blurred as her tears fell, soaking through the letters. The sea breeze whispered through the cracks in the window, and for a moment it felt as if the ocean itself was mourning with her. But even as the world around her dimmed, her surviving sons did not stop. The very next week, they packed their duffel bags, kissed their mother's hands, and walked back to the docks. Their faces were pale with grief, but steady with resolve. Because in Mathews County, men did not surrender to fear. They had salt in their veins and courage in their hearts. To them, the ocean was both enemy and home, and no matter how many it took, they would keep going back. Because that's what Mathews men did. They faced the storm, not because they were fearless, but because duty, love, and the memory of their brothers left them no choice. Chapter 6. Life aboard the merchant ships. For those who sailed across that unforgiving ocean, life aboard a merchant ship was not a grand adventure. It was a relentless test of endurance, courage, and faith. These were not mighty warships bristling with guns or armor. They were slow, lumbering vessels, built to carry cargo, not to fight. Their bellies were filled with the lifeblood of the Allied war effort: ammunition, oil, grain, fuel, medicine, everything an army or nation needed to survive. Each ship was a floating target, and every man aboard knew it. The days were long and grueling. The men slept in cramped, swaying bunks, the air thick with diesel, salt, and sweat. The constant vibration of the engine rattled through the metal hull, becoming a rhythm of survival, a sound that reminded them they were still alive. When the sea was rough, their bunks tilted like coffins, and sleep came in fragments, stolen minutes between fear and exhaustion. Meals were simple and often miserable: cold beans scooped from tin cans, bread that hardened within days, and bitter coffee that barely kept their eyes open during the endless watches. The ocean showed them no mercy, freezing winds one day, suffocating heat the next. But none of it compared to the one thing that haunted them all: the fear. Fear became their constant companion. It crept into their bones and lingered in the silence. Every creak of metal, every splash in the distance, every flicker of shadow beneath the waves. It could mean death. The men learned to hold their breath when the sonar pinged. They learned to tell the difference between the hum of their own engine and the ghostly sound of a U-boat lurking below. They moved quietly, spoke softly, lived cautiously, because they never knew when a torpedo would come. No one saw it until it was too late. A sudden roar, a flash of light, and then cold water rushing in. And yet, even in that world of darkness and dread, the human spirit found ways to shine. In the stillness of night, when the stars stretched endlessly over the black ocean, these men found brotherhood. They shared cigarettes on the deck, passing them hand to hand under the red glow of the ship's lamp. They laughed softly about home, about mother's cooking, sweethearts waiting, and the fishing trips they'd take once this madness was over. Sometimes they sang, old sailor songs, voices trembling but united, echoing across the waves like prayers. Those small moments, a shared laugh, a quiet song, a cup of coffee passed between trembling hands, were what kept them human. In the face of the ocean's rage and the enemy's shadow, they clung to each other. Because deep down, they all knew that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the will to keep sailing through it. Chapter 7. The Turning Point. Fighting Back. By mid-1943, the tide of war began to shift. The Allies developed better radar, faster destroyers, and air patrols to protect convoys. Merchant ships now sailed in groups, guarded by naval escorts. Still, the U-boats fought viciously. Convoys were ambushed. Ships exploded in the dead of night. But now the merchant mariners had something they didn't before: hope. Many of them, including the Mathews sailors, served on ships that managed to outmaneuver torpedoes or survive attacks. Some rescued their crewmates from burning seas. Others were decorated for bravery, though those medals would take decades to arrive. But victory had a price. By the end of the war, the merchant marine had suffered the highest casualty rate of any American service. Nearly 1 in every 26 men never returned home. Chapter 8. The End of War. The Silence After the Storm. In 1945, the guns fell silent. Cities celebrated. Soldiers marched home to parades, music, and banners. But for the merchant sailors, there were no parades, no bands, no medals. They returned to quiet docks, their uniforms worn, their eyes tired. They had fought one of the most dangerous wars imaginable, but history barely noticed them. Many found themselves jobless, forgotten by the country they had risked their lives for. For the Hodges family, not all 7 brothers came home. Some were buried at sea, their graves marked only by the waves. Their mother, Ollie, grew old with memories, the sound of the ocean always reminding her of the sons it had taken. Yet, in Mathews County, their names lived on, whispered in prayers, carved on memorials, remembered in every tide that touched the shore. Chapter 9. The Legacy of the Mathews Men. Years later, author William Giraud would bring their story back to life in his book, The Mathews Men, 7 Brothers, and the War Against Hitler's U-Boats. Through his words, the forgotten heroes of the sea were finally honored, their courage illuminated, their suffering acknowledged. The story of the Mathews Men reminds us that heroism isn't always about glory. Sometimes it's about endurance, about doing your duty even when no one is watching. It's about faith, the belief that even a single ship sailing into the darkness can change the course of history. Today, in Mathews County, the docks still stand, the waves still whisper the same song, and somewhere in that eternal rhythm, you can almost hear their voices, the laughter of 7 brothers carried by the wind, reminding us that courage never dies. Their war was fought without applause. Their victories came without celebration. But the Mathews men, and all who sailed beside them, helped win freedom for the world. They remind us that true bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it sails quietly through the darkest nights, with nothing but faith and duty to guide it home. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to honor them, by remembering that the price of peace was paid not only on the battlefield, but on the restless, endless sea. If you found this story powerful, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to this channel for more forgotten stories of courage, sacrifice, and humanity. Because history is not just about empires and leaders, it's about people like the Mathews men who gave everything so the world could live.